welcome to another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. I'm Matt, coming to you live from the Living Room Laboratory, and as always, I'm joined by my tech team. This week, we'll be talking about all things RAID arrays and how best to use them for your video production team. But before we get started, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button so you get the latest content from ProMAX systems as soon as it becomes available. So guys, let's kick this off. Nathaniel, why would a video professional use a RAID array in the first place?
There's lots of great reasons to use a RAID. Probably the biggest ones are capacity, performance, and data protection, which are all super high up on things that you want to do or things that you want to have as a video editor. But in general, you know, file sizes are so huge in the video editing world. You know, you're going to want most of the time, more data than you can get out of a single drive. And then there's just, you know, as we get into some of the different RAID types, they can actually provide a lot more protection than having all of your data just stored on a single drive. And then, you know, the performance side is a huge part of it too. You know, especially once you get into the SSD world, you know, it starts being, you get a lot more performance out of one SSD than you do out of one HDD. But boy, even with SSDs, once you start stacking them, you get a lot more performance to work with.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathaniel. Mike, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what some of that video performance boost you'll get?
Yeah, so essentially it's just the bulk of it is mostly the amount of drives that you have if you're talking about spinning disks, and depending on which way or how you stripe it as well. So, you know, RAID 5, RAID 6, you can go even more complicated and go like what RAID 50, RAID 60 and have even more redundancy. But in general, the more drives you have, the faster performance you have rather than, you know, let's just say even a workstation, you have one drive that you're going to be reading at super basic levels there. And of course, you know, when you go to SSD, it's just, you can't even compare. It's just insane at that point.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mike. Brian, Mike mentioned a couple of the different RAID configurations that are there. Do you want to dive into those, what they are, when you want to use those in certain situations?
Yeah, there's four primary ones that you're going to see the most, and it's RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, and RAID 6. And there's some variations on those and combinations of those, like Mike mentioned a RAID 50, which is literally a RAID 5 plus 0, which I'll get into in a second. But the real, in determining which one you want to use, if you're looking at RAID 0, well, let's look at it like this. If you've got two disks that you want to do something with, your only choices are RAID 0 and RAID 1, and your question is, do you want speed or do you want security? Or actually integrity, data integrity is probably the better way to say it. So RAID 0 basically doubles your speed. There's some caveats in that, but you're grabbing one part of a file from one drive at the same time you're grabbing another part of the file from the other drive, so you're grabbing it effectively twice as fast. RAID 1 doubles your data integrity because it's copying the same part of the file to both drives at the same time, meaning if one drive dies, you're good to go. Now, if one drive dies in a RAID 0, you're hosed. You will literally lose half of all the data on your system, and not like 50% of the files, but like 50% of each file, meaning each file is now dead. So there is some concerns around that. If you have more than 3 drives at your disposal, then RAID 5 or RAID 5, or actually if you have 4 drives or more, RAID 50, or excuse me, RAID 66. RAID 5 if you have 3 drives.
You're getting all sorts of tongue-tied here.
Yeah. RAID 6 if you have 4 drives or more, really 5 drives or more. And the differences there are those actually kind of give you a best of both worlds, where you have the ability to lose a drive or 2 drives with RAID 6, but you still aggregate the performance of all the disks that you have. So when we get into our larger systems, really anything over 4 or 5 drives is going to be a RAID 5. Anything larger than 16 bay is going to be a RAID 6 in most cases, or a RAID 50, which is kind of another selective way to do double data integrity. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to do it, but those are the primary ones that we see most often. Yeah, you're almost like for most consumer desktop stuff, RAID 0, RAID 1, and RAID 5 is what you'll see if you have more than a couple disks.
Okay.
Yeah, usually RAID 5 is what you're going to see in like a server, like,
yep.
You know, or if you've got like a 4, 6, 8 drive kind of desktop, like a larger RAID, that's generally where you're going to see your RAID 5s and your RAID 6s.
Okay.
And,
You had mentioned striping. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what that is?
I mean, it's a setting that goes along with the RAID, and it is very important, especially in our world, because it really dictates performance. And specifically the types of files that you're using on a RAID. In our space, we're using giant files, right? So we use large stripes that speed things up quite a bit for the big files. But if we were to send like database size files to one of our systems that has the large stripe size, it wouldn't perform as well as if you had small stripe sizes for a database-based system. So it's really just about, a comment to the fact that, there's tuning that can be done even at the RAID level. There's a lot of tuning that can be done at the RAID level, depending on how deep you want to get into it. So if you do want to do these things, kind of a DIY type solution, it's a pretty big rabbit hole to drop down. I mean, ProMAX and other companies, like, we lived and breathed RAIDs, and we still do to a large degree for the last decade. That was the core component of our offerings, was how RAIDs were handled and the performance around them. So there's a lot to get into there.
Okay. And as video production teams are having to work in remote environments, how can they use a RAID in a remote environment? Like, what does that look like? Is that usable?
Sure. The smaller scale RAIDs, like you can RAID together a couple of SSDs, and now you're talking about, potentially, if you have the network to support it, like, or direct attach like a Thunderbolt or something, you're talking over gigabyte a second of data. You RAID 4 of them together, and you're potentially over 2 gigabytes a second of data. The big problem with SSD RAIDs is capacity. Compared to a hard drive, we get 16 terabytes on a single hard drive these days. But finding a SSD over 4 terabytes is generally a pretty tough deal to find one that's cost effective. So, yeah, no, they're absolutely usable remotely, but usually you're talking about the smaller RAID 1s, RAID 0s, kind of in local, direct attach type environments.
I'll throw out there a theoretical argument that I think is relevant. I would argue that a remote environment makes RAID either more important or less important, one or the other. And let me work this out. So like with our media hubs and, the way we set up remote environments, you've got a little server at every person's house, and that data is syncing between all of those servers. Mm-hmm. In that scenario, an individual RAID at an individual's house is actually less important, because that data is already being replicated to other locations just because of the design of the system. Right. So in that scenario, I was actually working this out with one of our customers where they're setting that up as a RAID 0, because they've got a 2 drive, 14 terabytes. And they're like, well, if it's already copied everywhere, let me go for the speed. And they wanted the capacity as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that scenario, RAID in a remote environment, less important because it's backed up somewhere else. On the other side of that, in a lot of remote workflows where you don't have syncing happening between what you're working on locally at your home and a larger data pool, let's say you're working like a VPN, a push-pull, a proxy workflow where you're copying data and then locally working on that.
Yeah, or you have unique data.
You have unique data, which means a RAID is more important to be thinking about in a remote environment, because you don't have the luxury of like a shared storage environment where it's centralized and, backup and data protection is, up to the post-production supervisor. So,
yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, because if you're working in a push-pull type situation and you take footage home, or you're working on that edit, and God forbid your house burns down or something, if you're mailing hard drives back and forth, that was the only copy of that data.
Yeah.
So yeah, having a RAID in that situation probably wouldn't help, but having, being able to survive a disk failure is certainly, the bare minimum level of kind of protection you would want to afford yourself in that.
Correct. Or more realistically, accidental data deletion. Like that's where a lot of that, and I'm stepping into other technologies. RAIDs will not help with data deletion. Brian, you're just mad. I'm sorry.
No, it's a nerd trap that I'm gonna spring here. No, but no, you're not wrong there. Like the analogy I always use is like the RAID is like The RAID is the integrity of the file system, or excuse me, the hardware that the file system lives on. We can survive failures in that, right? But if the data that's in there is corrupt, then you're just ensuring the survival of corrupt data at that point. So
I like that. I haven't heard you say that one.
Yeah, no, I've got a 55-gallon drum analogy too for the
our corrupt data is safe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a garbage in, garbage out scenario at that point,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
Just because you can write data to the drive, if you're writing bad data, it's
Yeah.
just saving bad data. But yeah, no, the RAID stuff is designed to serve. And one really important thing about RAIDs, this is just something, especially as we get into, there's a lot of new users coming online with the whole remote workflow situation that we're all in, right? And they're being exposed to RAIDs for the first time in some cases. And one really important thing to remember about RAID systems are not designed to never fail. They're designed to survive failures. Like, we know for a fact hard drives are going to fail. Hands down, it's going to happen. These systems are designed to survive one or more multiple failures while keeping your data intact. So it's important, if you do have a RAID, to know what to do if your particular RAID fails in one way or another. When it beeps, your data is potentially at risk. It's probably not gone if you've got a RAID, but unless you do the right things in a timely manner, it might be. So that's another really important thing with a RAID, is to know what you have, to know how to address it if something does happen, because it's designed to protect your data, but it can only alert you to the condition, and you're going to have to act on it in some way, shape, or form.
Gotcha. All right, guys. Well, thanks for all that really helpful information. And thanks everyone for joining this week for another ProMAX Tech Talk. Stay tuned next week for our latest episode, and click the link below for a blog that dives into more things, all RAIDs, so you can learn more about this and go through any questions you might have. If you have any questions after that, feel free to reach out to us or leave a comment below. And if there's anything you want to see on a future episode, let us know. We'll be glad to get it on a future episode. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.